How you doing? Yeah, I got a lot of them.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first lecture of week 4. We're doing Monopoly today. Just before we get started, just a reminder that we're starting the 4th week of a 5-week course. So we're getting towards the end of our course. You have a number of assessment items that you need to finish by next week. You have a number of assessment items that you need to finish by next week. So I'd just ask you to keep working consistently through those. You will get the details of the exam via an announcement from William today or tomorrow, and so you'll know when the exam is when he publishes the details of that, and then I will go through the outline of the exam with you in one of our future lectures. There will be very little time between the end of the study period, the course period. So the course finishes on Friday week, and there will be very little time between there and the exam. So what I'm going to do next week is record the 2 week 5 lectures a little bit early. I will put a notice up about when I am going to do those. You can watch them live or watch the recording. Most people are watching the recordings. Probably I will do the first lecture of week 5 on Thursday of this week, and then perhaps the second lecture of week 5 on Monday of next week. But I will put an announcement up so that you know when you can, when you'll be able to access those lectures. We want to do that so that students have a little bit of time to review before the exam. It's all very tight. In the normal 3 terms, we have a study week, but of course we don't have that luxury in the summer school. So those lectures will move forward a little bit, and I'll give you the details. So before we then, I'll move forward with the lecture now. And I'll transition into the lecture, and away we go. So we're doing Monopoly this week, and what we're doing when we see Monopoly is that we think about what we've done to this point and the assumptions that we're making around the assumptions that we're making around the markets that we're studying. So we're doing we've been doing perfectly competitive markets up to this point. But today we're looking at the situations in which the assumptions that we've been making about the market no longer hold. So I'm just going to remind you then of what our assumptions were when we spoke about perfect competition. So in perfect competition, we make a number of assumptions about the sort of state of the world that we're in, and I'm just trying to get my pen going here for you. So we make a number of assumptions. So let's just think about what the assumptions are in perfect competition. When we're thinking about perfect competition, we assume that consumers and suppliers are price takers. In other words, we're assuming that the market determines the price, and then everyone in the market, the buyers and the sellers, all need to accept the market price. We're assuming that goods are homogeneous, in other words, that all firms produce an identical product. We're assuming there are no externalities. In other words, we're assuming that when we make or consume these products, we don't affect anybody else. Now, externalities is a big topic for us in this course, and externalities is topic 9. But that's what externalities basically means, that when we buy a product or sell a product, there's no effect on anybody else who's perhaps not in the market at all. So we'll come back to that issue of externalities later. We're assuming that goods are excludable and rival. I haven't explained these terms to you either, but this is, we'll do this stuff in chapter 10. That's chapter 10. This stuff here, externalities, this is chapter 9. So we haven't explained these terms, but we will get to these. We will get to these terms in our next couple of lectures. We're assuming in the market that there's full information about the prices, there's full information about the products, there's full information about the level of profit that the firms are making. So we're making that assumption, and we're also assuming that it's easy to enter the market and get out of the market. We're assuming that there's free entry and free exit. But as of today and in the lectures to come, we're going to be discussing the fact that sometimes firms are not price takers. Sometimes firms or buyers as well can be price makers, where they are in a position to influence the level of price. We may be in markets where we get to where goods are not homogeneous. In other words, where firms all produce different products. And we'll be doing a bit of this in chapter 8. Right? We'll be doing a bit of that in chapter 8. In chapter 9, we'll see that there are externalities in the production and consumption of some products, and then in chapter 10 we'll also be looking at the excludable and rival nature of these goods. So what are we looking at specifically today? What aspects of the market are we looking at when we do monopoly? When we do monopoly, we say firms and suppliers, particularly suppliers, are not price takers. We say they are price makers. We'll get into defining what that means in 2 or 3 slides' time. And then we're also assuming there is no free exit or entry. So that's what we're looking at today. And these are the situations that apply in monopoly. So that's today's topic. So we're looking at a situation where we're in monopoly, and the circumstances of free entry and exit and being price takers do not apply. So I'm going to, in a minute then, I'm going to insert a slide, just for a minute here. I'm going to insert a blank slide so I can refer to this in a minute. So when we think about the issue of market power, in monopoly we say firms have market power. So that's the first thing first characteristic that we look at with a monopoly. So what is market power? Market power is said to be where a firm is a price maker. A firm is a price maker. If it has the ability to set its own prices. In other words, it could move the price up or it can move the price down. The firm has the choice of what price to charge. So the firm has the ability to set its own price. And where is market power strongest? Market power is strongest in the market structure of monopoly. So that's our topic for today. So I'm going to discuss or show you what we mean by market power. We've got two diagrams in front of us. I've dropped a blank slide in to kind of contextualize the one on the left. So when we say firms are price takers, right? When we say firms are price takers, the example that we've been using to this point is perfect competition. So we say firms in perfect competition are price takers, and the firm will have a demand curve that looks like the one that you see in front of you, the one on the left. So let's just see. I want to sort of contextualize this a bit more. We know that in the market in perfect competition, so I'm going to do a diagram for the market. Right, the market in perfect competition. The market looks like this. There are many buyers. There are many sellers. There are many buyers and many sellers. And there will be a quantity and a price, and they will be the market price. That will be the market price. Now, for the firm in that market, for the individual firm in that market, everyone in that market has to accept that market price. They have to accept that market price. So over here on the left, the equilibrium quantity might be, perhaps 1,000. But over on the right, when we're looking at the firm is just a very small part of the overall firm. So the firm's scale of quantity might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. And when we say the firm has no market power, this firm will get the same price, and that price will also equal its marginal revenue. And that won't matter whether the firm produces one good, or whether the firm produces two goods, or whether the firm produces three goods, or whether the firm produces four goods, or five goods. The firm cannot change the price by changing its quantity. The price simply stays the same. But that is different for a firm in monopoly. So what's a firm in monopoly look like? The firm in monopoly looks like the situation on the right. So this is the monopoly's demand curve looks like this. The monopoly firm is the only firm in the market, and so it has a demand curve that is downward sloping. So I'm going to go down to the next slide, and then we can make the monopoly diagram a little bit bigger. And what I want to show you here is this, that the monopoly could, for example, choose to set the price at P1. That's the monopoly's choice. They can charge P1, or they could charge a different price. They could charge P2. That's the monopoly's choice. They can choose any price they like. Whereas the firm in perfect competition, they have no choice about the price. They have no choice about the price. The price is the same price no matter what the quantity. But the monopoly firm has the ability to set the price. However, when it does set the price, the monopoly is still only half the market. So if the monopoly was to charge a higher price, lots of people would say, well, that's a great thing. Let's charge the highest price possible. But of course, when the monopoly does set that price, the quantity would be chosen by the demander. So although they can set the price, they don't have unlimited power because it's still the other side of the market, the demand side of the market, that sets the quantity if the monopoly sets the price. On the other hand, the monopoly could set the quantity. They could say, oh, we're just going to sell this quantity, and then they would then have to charge a price that would get the demanders to buy that product. So the monopoly can set the price or quantity, but not both. So I'll just write that as a little note up here. The monopoly can set price or quantity, but not both. But they still have a choice. They still have a choice about what price they can charge. If the monopoly decides to increase its output to QD1, then the demanders will say, well, we're not paying P1 if there's a larger quantity supplied. The monopoly will have to charge P2 in order to sell the quantity that they have chosen. So they can choose price or quantity, but not both. That's the situation that monopolists exist in. So far, we've only looked at perfect competition up until today. Today we are doing monopoly. Today we are doing monopoly. We're not really doing monopolistic competition, but I'll just talk to you briefly to the camera about what monopolistic competition is. Firstly, you won't get many questions on Playconomics about monopolistic competition, but we still need to know what it is. It's a bit like perfect competition, because in perfect competition there are many, many sellers, and that is the same case in monopolistic competition. It's a funny sounding word or term, because when we say monopoly, people usually think about just one firm. But in monopolistic competition, there are many firms competing. I'll give you an example of what monopolistic competition looks like. If you have been to a large city like Sydney and you have been to, say, Chinatown, that is a good example of monopolistic competition. And what makes monopolistic competition different to perfect competition is this, what we call product differentiation. If you go to Chinatown, there are many restaurants, hundreds of restaurants probably, and they are all selling Chinese cuisine. They're all selling Chinese dishes, but each one is a little bit different to their neighbour, to the other firms. So although the products are similar, they're not exactly the same. And that's where the term monopolistic competition comes from, because each firm is selling a unique product, although there are close substitutes. And what that means is that, as you know, if you go to a place like Chinatown, there's many, many choices available to the consumer. The products are largely similar. It'll all be Chinese dishes, but the prices won't be the same and the quality won't be the same. The restaurant won't look the same. It's not an homogeneous product. That's what monopolistic competition means. And those firms in monopolistic competition do have some choice about price. And that is why when you go to Chinatown, although the products are similar, the prices, as you know, in each restaurant is slightly different. So those restaurants do have the capacity to change their price. The ones that have very special menus or who are a bit famous or they're popular for one reason or another, then they will very often be able to charge a different price to other firms. So those firms do have some control, some market power, some ability to control their price. But that's all we really need to know about monopolistic competition in this course. Today's topic is about monopoly, and we'll be going back to that. The other topic that we're briefly going to look at today is the area of oligopoly, but we're only mentioning it today. And the reason we're only mentioning it today is because that is the topic of our next lecture. That's the topic of chapter 8. Very briefly, what's oligopoly? Oligopoly is a market of big firms like monopoly, but where the market is not dominated by one firm, it's dominated by a few firms. There might be 2, 3, maybe 10 firms in the market. But it's not like perfect competition where there are a great number of firms in the market. So that's oligopoly, and that will be our next topic. I'm going back to the monopoly notes now, and today we're pretty much talking just about monopoly. So, in monopoly, one thing that sets monopoly apart from other markets is the issue of entry and exit. Entry and exit. In monopoly, there is not free entry and exit. Other firms cannot enter the market. We say that in monopoly, there are barriers to entry. What's a barrier? A barrier is anything that stops another firm opening up. For example, if the monopoly controls all the resources to produce a product, then that means only the monopoly will be able to make the product, and therefore the monopoly will be the only seller in the market. So, for example, if a single firm could get control over all the silicon in the world, then that would mean that firm would have a monopoly over being able to manufacture silicon chips used in so many of all of our devices that we use today. Or perhaps the monopoly has a patent or a copyright over a product, so that they perhaps invented the product, they registered the patent, so that only that firm has the ability to manufacture that product. An example of this happened in COVID, where Pfizer or AstraZeneca invented their own vaccines, and those firms were the only ones able to manufacture those vaccines for a time, and therefore they had a lot of market power because they were the only manufacturer, and they had a lot of pricing power as a result. A third reason might be where firms are able to produce on a much bigger scale. And of course, when you produce on a much bigger scale, the average cost of production falls. And so the big firms, the monopoly gets an advantage over any new firm trying to open up, because the monopoly is already mass producing the product, and its average cost is lower as a result of that mass production. The last one is a thing called network economies, where a big firm has the monopoly because it controls a network. I'll give you an example here. A firm like or a platform like Instagram has a big network of people on Instagram. And so the value of Instagram to the customer is the fact that there are a lot of other customers. There's a lot of other people with accounts on Instagram, and therefore you have a network. Now, if a new social media platform opens up and there are very few people on that platform to begin with, then your network will not be very great when you open an account with that new firm. And so it's very hard for new social media firms to open up because the existing ones have a much greater network, and therefore the people on that network are unlikely to shift to the new competition. So that's what we mean by network economies. So for whatever reason, there's going to be some barriers to entry that stop new firms entering the market, and what that means is the monopoly maintains its monopoly power. So I've just spoken to you very briefly about economies of scale. Economies of scale really is when it occurs when the average cost of production decreases with the amount of goods produced. And so, of course, what this means is, right, this means that the large firm has the advantage. The large firm has the cost advantage, and because they have the cost advantage, right? They produce at a lower cost. Their average cost is lower. Then it's very difficult for new firms to start. So that's what we mean when we say that a firm has economies of scale. All right. Now, so firms experiencing increasing returns to scale, IRS, become more profitable with size. And sometimes this means that a single firm can produce a good at a lower cost. A single firm can produce a good more efficiently than small firms. So a single firm is likely to have a lower average cost. And where this happens, we say this is a natural monopoly. Now, what do we mean by the term natural? Usually, when we refer to a monopoly, we'd usually say there's not much competition here, and therefore the firm can make its price higher. But if a firm has large economies of scale, circling the term at the top, if the firm has large economies of scale, and if the firm has lower average costs, actually the monopoly might be the market form that's best for the consumer. So we usually would say that competition is good for the consumer, but in the case of a natural monopoly, sometimes the monopoly is best for the consumer. And that's really the situation that we're looking at today. We're looking at for the rest of the day, the situation of the natural monopoly. So what's a natural monopoly then? A natural monopoly denotes a monopoly that occurs because of increasing returns to scale. And what does that mean? That means it has, in inverted commas, economies of scale. And what does that mean? That means lower average cost. lower average cost. And what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? It means it's difficult for this creates a barrier to new firms. That's a barrier to new firms, and that's why the firm keeps its monopoly. So that's the term. That's what we mean when we say a natural monopoly. Okay, so we're doing all of what I've said so far. Might have implications for other chapters, but it particularly has implications for Chapter 7. It particularly has implications for the monopoly. And of course, this monopoly will have a lot of market power. Why will it have a lot of market power? Because there is limited competition. There's limited competition. So the monopoly is, what is a monopoly? A monopoly is a market structure where there is only one firm in the market, right? Where there is only one firm in the market, and as a result of being one firm in the market, there is no close competition. There is no close competition. Competition. I've misspelled that. Excuse me. Competition. No close competition. And of course, no close competition, yes, no close substitute. So the firm owns the market. The firm owns the market. So we're now going to go through, and I'm going to go through these figures slowly with you. And the reason I want to go slowly is because I want to get you to think about the various aspects of cost and revenue of the monopoly. And so what we've got here is the cost structure of the monopoly first. The cost structure. As we've already seen, a firm has two types of costs. It has a fixed cost and it has a variable cost, right? The fixed cost, what's an example of the fixed cost? The building, maybe rent, right? Rent. And what's the variable cost? Maybe labor. That's an example of the fixed cost and variable cost. Why is fixed cost a rent? Why is rent a fixed cost? Because if we've got a building, we're paying the same amount of money, whether that building produces 0 goods, 200 goods, 400, 600, 800, 1,000. The rent for the building will be the same. However, the variable cost, which I'm circling in blue, that's going to go up because in order to add quantity, I've just put a plus to the quantity, in order to go from 200, 400, 600, 800, 1,000, in order to get more quantity, you need more workers over on the left-hand column. And if you have more workers, then you need to pay more wages. That's what the W is there. The W is the wage. And in this case, each worker is earning $10. So 2 workers drawing across, blue line drawing across, 2 workers would result in $20 of variable cost because we have to pay 2 workers, $10 each. 4 workers, well, that will be a variable cost of $40 because we have to pay 4 workers $10 each. And so then we come over to our total cost. Look at our total cost. I'll do the total cost in green. The total cost is going to be circling the fixed cost and the variable cost. Circling the fixed cost and the variable cost. And one thing we need to point out is that when the firm is producing 0 goods, I'm circling 0 in the quantity column, we will be using 0 workers, and therefore there's 0 variable cost, and the only cost, which I'm drawing a square around, is the fixed cost. We're still renting the building, but the building is empty. There are no workers in the building. So, and in the short term, that might be the situation. In the long term, we would be looking to get rid of the building, either waiting for our lease to end or selling the building if we already own the building. So that's our relation between fixed cost, variable cost, and total cost. And then we've got a couple of other costs that we're looking at as we explore on. We've got to work out our average variable cost, our average fixed cost. Now, what we've got to insert in here, of course, which we haven't got on these slides, these are the text slides, we haven't got a column between those two. Like for 200 goods, the average variable cost of a single product is 5 cents. The average total cost is 55 cents. So there's got to be another column in here, 50. That will be our average fixed cost. Our average fixed cost. What would be our average fixed cost across this line? Across this line, the average variable cost is 5 cents. The average total cost is 22 cents. So the average fixed cost must be 17 cents. So that's the first thing that I want to do with you as we move through our slides. So I'm going to insert our average fixed cost in here now, and I really need people to focus on why this is so important for a natural monopoly. I'll come back and talk down the camera to you when I do this. So we know that the firm is paying a fixed cost of $100. So what is the average fixed cost? Well, if for our $100 we were getting 200 goods, all I would do is put $100, 200 goods. I will fix that up, sorry. Excuse me. Make that a little bit neater. I've got my fixed cost is $100 and I'm producing 200 goods. So that would give me an average fixed cost of 50 cents. That would give me an average fixed cost of 50 cents. What about in our second line? In our second line, we've got 400 goods, but our fixed cost is still $100. The fixed cost hasn't changed. What's changed is the number on the bottom. And of course, $100 on $400 goods is 25 cents. What you can see as you look down this column here, this average fixed cost, is that it is falling. It falls from 50 cents to 25 to 16.7 or 17 cents, near enough, 12.5 cents, and then 10 cents. And if we insert those numbers over here, We insert those numbers over here. Then we can see the connection between average variable cost and average total cost. So I have done that on the, have I done that on the next column? I haven't. But anyway, you can see from what I've done there how we get from the average variable cost to the average total cost by inserting our average fixed cost. And I'm putting a big black rectangle around that label. Our average fixed cost goes in there. And what I would really like to do before we move to the next slide is think about what our graph would look like if we were to graph our average fixed cost. Here's our quantity. Here's our average fixed cost on the left. Our average fixed cost starts at 50, then it goes to 25, then it goes to 16.7, 12.5, 10. You can see that this line is falling, 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 falling. What would our average fixed cost look like? For example, if we go over here, what would it look like if this 1,000 became 10,000? Well, if that 1,000 became 10,000, our average fixed cost now would just be 1 cent. So our average fixed cost tends to get lower the more and more and more we produce. So I'm going to come back and talk to you via the camera for a bit and explain why this is so important. We're looking at natural monopolies, and these are monopolies that favour one big firm. That's what a natural monopoly is. One big firm is better than 2 small firms or 3 smaller firms for the consumer and for the firm. And the reason is because the average fixed cost falls and falls and falls. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. Example number 1 is a telephone company. Now, what does it require to build a telephone company? It requires a lot of money because you need a big data center, right? Costs a lot of money, and then you need towers to transmit the mobile signals between each other. So it's very expensive to build a telephone system. I want you to imagine that it costs $1 billion to build the telephone system, and then we make 1 phone call. What's the average fixed cost? The average fixed cost is $1 billion. It's a very expensive phone call. But when we make more phone calls, we don't need more data center because its capacity is huge. We don't need more towers. Their capacity is huge. So if we make 1 million phone calls and our network cost $1 billion, now each phone call is worth $1,000. If we make 1 billion phone calls, each phone call average fixed cost is now $1. If we make 10 billion phone calls, the average fixed cost falls to 10 cents. If we make 100 billion phone calls, the average fixed cost is now 1 cent. So the more and more and more output the firm has, the lower the average fixed cost is. And that is why firms will give you free phone calls as part of your deal, because every phone call you make simply lowers the average fixed cost, and the marginal cost is virtually zero. It doesn't cost the firm anything much for you to make 1 more phone call because all the costs have been fixed. Another example of a natural monopoly might be a city railway system. If you think about the railway system, it's very expensive to build. The more people that travel on the railway system allows the railway company to spread the cost of that railway system over more passengers. So the average fixed cost is falling falling. The average fixed cost is falling. However, the marginal cost is very low. The marginal cost is virtually zero. If you think about when you step onto a train, you become the marginal passenger. You are the extra passenger getting on the train. How much does it cost the railway company? Very little, because the train was going anyway. The train is already built. The system is already built. You're just another passenger on the train. There'll be some small marginal costs, cleaning, a little bit of wear and tear on the train, but the marginal costs are very low. And that is what we mean when we talk about a natural monopoly. We're talking about a firm with a very large fixed cost and a very small marginal cost. And that's what we've got in the diagram, in the table that we're presenting to you this morning. So we're going to move on now down to our next slide. We'll move on now down to our next slide, but before we move on, just remember, I'm circling this average fixed cost curve. I want you to keep that concept in mind as we go through. We're now looking at the average variable cost. The average variable cost. How are we getting to the average variable cost? We're looking at the cost of labour. We're looking at the cost of labour here. In this case. So these are the workers per day. And all I do is, when I'm looking at the average variable cost, is to say, if I want to know what is the average variable cost of 600 goods, I say, well, that's my quantity. That's the quantity. How much did it cost us to get 600 goods? Well, to get 600 goods, we need 3 workers, and we need to pay those 3 workers $10 each. So our total cost is $30. So we simply put our $30 of wages over 600 goods. So that 600 is the quantity. This is the average cost. We put one over the other. We get 300 on 600, and that's how we get to our 5 cents. That's where our 5 cents comes from. So our average variable cost is 5 cents. If we take good number, well, we could take. We've worked out. I'm going to continue across here on line 600. Remember, our average fixed cost is 16.7. I'm going to round that 16.7 up to 17. So we've got 17, and now we can see where our average total cost is coming from. We've got in our total cost of this good is 22 cents. I'm underlining the 22 cents. Where are those costs coming from? 17 cents is coming from the part of production paid by the building, and 5 cents is coming from the part paid by the labour. So we have 2 resources, the infrastructure, the building, and the labour. And in this case, you can see that most of the cost is coming from the building. By the time we get down to 1,000 goods, the part paid by the building is much smaller. It's only 10 cents. So the part of total cost paid by the fixed resource gets smaller and smaller as the output grows, because we're spreading that fixed cost of production. Okay, one last thing then. Let's think about this cost. Let's think about this average fixed cost. Average variable cost. I'm going to go back to the previous slide. What is this average variable cost curve looking like in this circumstance? What's it looking like? Think about this, the shape of this diagram. Here is the quantity on the bottom line, the bottom of the horizontal axis, and I'm now drawing in blue the shape of the average variable cost curve. It's just a horizontal line, and there is our average variable cost. Our average variable cost is there, and it's not changing as our quantity changes. The last column that I want to look at is our marginal cost. Here's our marginal cost here over on the right-hand side. I'm circling marginal cost. Our marginal cost. Now, how am I getting to my marginal cost? How am I getting to my marginal cost? Think about this. If we were producing 400 goods, we would use 2 workers. If we need to increase our output and go from 400 to 600 goods, we would need 3 workers. So we're getting an extra 200 goods. Over on the right-hand side, that's where my 200 is coming from. I'm getting an extra 200 goods. It's the change in the quantity. It's the change in the quantity. I've put an arrow to it there. And then we also know that in order to get our 200 extra goods, we need 1 more worker. We need 1 more worker. We need to go from 2 workers to 3 workers. So our cost of production goes up by $10. Where's that $10 coming from? That $10 is coming from 1 more worker. So we employed 1 more worker. We got 200 more goods, and for that, so when we multiply, when we do that division, we see that each of these 200 goods added 5 cents to production. Each of these 200 goods added 5 cents to production. So that's how we calculate our marginal cost. So what we've got in front of us now then is the shape of our curves, right? We've got the shape of our curves. In particular, I want you to think about the cost curves before we think about anything else. We've got the cost curves. Why is our average total cost coming down? Why is our average total cost coming down? Our average total cost is coming down. I'm drawing an arrow along the line. It's coming down. Why is it coming down? Because as we produce more goods, we get a lower average fixed cost. We get a lower average fixed cost, and so that is bringing our cost of production down. And what it means is I'm circling over here the quantity axis. As we increase our quantity, our costs get lower. So this is the whole situation for the natural monopoly, that as the firm produces more and more goods, the costs of production get lower, and that means the big firm has the advantage, and that's why we say it's a natural monopoly, because the advantage comes from it being big. The other line I want you to think about is the shape of the marginal cost curve. The marginal cost curve, think about the marginal cost curve over here on the right. 5 cents, 5 cents, 5 cents, 5 cents at every quantity. So how am I going to graph that? I'm going to graph it by a flat, low and flat line. Where am I? What number could I put in there? I could put in 0.05 cents, and that would be our marginal cost. So we've got a big fixed cost, but a falling average fixed cost, and a very low and flat marginal cost. Next, on our diagram, on this table, we're going to move a couple of columns from our previous table. So we're looking at our cost curves, and we're looking in particular where we're looking at our marginal cost. We're going to look at our marginal cost, and we're going to look at our average total cost. I think that's what we're going to superimpose on our next diagram. But before we get to that, we then have to think about our revenue, right? We're thinking about our revenue. So when we're thinking about our demand curve, we think about the quantity of goods. So I'm drawing the two key columns here. Here's the quantity. Here's the price. We put those together and we have a demand curve. And to get the revenue at any point on our demand curve, to get the revenue at any point on our demand curve, I'm going to insert a diagram in here. So when we think about our demand curve, we draw it like so. We simply say that we have a price, right? We have a price, we have a quantity. We know that our quantities can be 200, or it can be 400, 600, 800, etc. And we're just given these numbers, we're given these numbers 85, 65, 45, 25, and 5. So we simply put those in here, right, at 200, right, at 85, we put a dot. Then we have 65, we put a dot. 45, we put another dot. 25, we put another dot, etc. So there's our demand curve sloping down. So that's what these two columns in red are about. And then we have to say, well, at each price, what is the revenue? What is the revenue at each price? So I'm not doing it at each price. I'm going to do it at one price. At 45, we're selling 600 goods. This rectangle here is our revenue. How much is that? What is that number equal to? Well, we simply multiply 45 cents by 600 and we get the number 260. All right, we get the number 260. What would be the revenue at 800? What would be the revenue at 800? What's this number? Well, it would be 0.25 times 800. We simply come back up here. We can read it across. At 800, the revenue is 200. Right? The revenue is 200. So we come back up here. I've made a mistake here. Forgive me. This is 270. And now this would just be, this number here equals 200. So you know what you're seeing? You're seeing that if the price falls between 45 and 65, the revenue actually goes down. That would tell me between these two dots on the demand curve that if we're moving down the demand curve that way, the first thing that's telling me is that the demand is inelastic in that zone because the revenue is falling. The revenue is falling, and the price is falling. So they are moving in the same direction. The firm would not do that. The firm would not choose to do that voluntarily. They would charge 45 over 65 any day of the week. So that's our revenue. But then we have to work out beyond that, what is our marginal revenue? So let's go back here and look at this column here, the marginal revenue. So for that, I have to come over here. And I'm only going to do the marginal revenue in a couple of cases. I'm going to do the marginal revenue in a couple of cases. The first one I'm going to do is between 200, one worker and 2 workers. If we add those workers, we get 200 more goods. We get 200 more goods. And how much more money would we get? How much more money would we get? We'd go from 170 to 260. So how much more money would we get? We'd get $90 more for 200 goods. And so that's going to be 85 cents per good every time. When we increase our sales from 200 to 400, we're getting 85 cents per good, each of those 200. I'm going to go one more. What if we then go from 2 workers to 3 workers? We're getting another 200 goods, 400 to 600. So we're getting another 200 goods. How much more revenue are we getting? Well, we're going from sorry, I've made a mistake here. Excuse me. When we go from 200 to 400, we've got 90 on 200. I should have thought that a bit better. Right, this is 45 cents. There it is there, 45 cents on the right-hand side. And if we move one further, if we move from 2 workers to 3 workers, we get 200 more goods. How much more cost is involved? How much more cost is involved in the 3rd worker? How much more revenue? We go from 260 to 270. So that's just $10 more. So we're now only getting 5 more cents per good. We're just getting 5 more cents per good. So moving from 200 to 400, we're getting 45 cents per good extra. But if we move from 400 to 600, we're only getting 5 more cents per good. Our marginal revenue is falling. Our marginal revenue is falling. And we're now graphing our marginal revenue curve. We're graphing our marginal revenue curve before you here. One other thing I want to do here with this table, one other aspect of this diagram that I want to see here. You can see that we've got the we're stepping down. Why are we stepping down like this? Because we're going from 200 to 400 to 600 to 800. But on our table, we don't have any numbers between 200, 400, 600 and 800. So that's why we just step down at every 200. In other words, what we've got here is a discrete curve where we're just graphing at a number of points. we're not graphing at every point. It's not a continuous curve. All right, so the next thing is then we have to decide where would this monopoly want to set its output? Where would this monopoly want to set its output? So I'm going to go back a little bit and I'm going to clean this diagram up. Clean this diagram up. And on this table, you could have a table like this on your exam, and you want to know what quantity will the monopoly want to produce at. So this monopoly will want to equate its marginal cost and its marginal revenue. This has always been our formula for our profit maximizing point. So if we look at our two columns here, our marginal column, cost column, and our marginal revenue column, there is only one point at which these two are equal, and that is at the output of 600. So that output will be our maximum profit point. That's our maximum profit point. At that point, how much is the firm charging for its goods? The firm will say, I want to set 45 cents as my price. That's what the firm is going to show. The firm is going to show 45 cents. That is the price that the firm chooses. Remember, this firm is a price maker. So this firm makes this price. We call that PM. Why M? Well, I can give it a number of reasons. One, it's the monopoly price. Two, it's the maximum profit price. It's the maximum profit price. And that will be the firm's profit maximizing output. Now, we'll be able to calculate what that profit is shortly. Just remember, at this price, the revenue of this firm at that price is 270. So the firm is making 270 in revenue. Let's then go down to our cost structure, our cost diagram, and work out what our average cost, our total cost was at 600. At 600, our total cost of 600 was 130. So how much profit will the firm get? The firm will get 270 in revenue minus 130 in costs, and so its profit will be $140. So the profit equals the total revenue minus the total cost. We already looked at the total. We looked at the revenue. It was 140. Right? The revenue was the total revenue was total revenue was 270. Total revenue was 270, and the total cost is 130. So that should give us our profit. All right. So now let's apply what we're going to do to this diagram. Let's apply what we're going to do to this diagram. We've got our diagram in front of us. Let's think about all our lines on the diagram. The average cost curve, I'm circling average cost. Our average cost is falling. Why is the average cost falling? Because the average fixed cost is falling. the marginal cost curve is flat. Extra goods cost us not much for each extra good, and it's not rising. And so how would we determine our maximum profit point? We find our marginal revenue line. We find our marginal revenue. We find our marginal cost. I'm circling both of these in red, and I put a dot. And that is how I know my quantity to produce. So I've got a marginal revenue, marginal cost. At this quantity, I then take my line up and I find what price should I charge. And I already know that. I've already calculated that. That's 0.45. What will be the average cost? Well, to find the average cost, we find the average cost here at 22. It's 22 cents. There is our average cost. Come back to our average cost curve. So that's going to be 22 cents. 0.22. How much profit is the firm making each time it makes the good? 23 cents. How many times does it make the good? We've already calculated that. 600 times, and that should give us our profit. That should give us our profit. So we bring that down to the next diagram. I've brought this down. I've reproduced some of our diagrams. So firstly, just to revise where we're up to, we're in monopoly. We've got a downward sloping curve. Secondly, we've got our revenues. We can work out our revenue from our curve at any price. At any price, we work out the quantity, and this is our revenue. Next, we work out our marginal revenue. How do we work out our marginal revenue? Our extra revenue, that's 10. Our extra revenue here, is 90. On our extra output, that's 200. All right, 90 extra 200. So then we have $90 on 200. Right, that's going to give us our 45 cents. Right, that's giving us our 45 cents. And that's our marginal revenue. Where is our marginal? Where's our marginal revenue equal to our marginal cost? At 45 cents. Right, that's our marginal revenue, and so our maximum profit point will be at 600. Right, that's where our maximum profit point is. The price 600. At the price of 45 cents. So we've got it all set out in our table here. How are we working out our marginal revenue, our maximum price, our maximum profit output at 600? Why is it 600? Because the marginal revenue and the marginal cost are the same. And then, and we've got our price. So I've now got our diagram in front of us here. right? I've got our diagram in front of us. I've got our profit shown on our diagram. So let's just go through this very slowly. Where's our output? Our output is at 600. Why is our output at 600? Because at this point, our marginal revenue equals our marginal cost, and they each equal 0.05. That's why we're producing 600. At 600, what is our price? Our price is 45 cents. At 600, what's our average cost? 22 cents. What's the difference between those 2 points? 23 cents. And so here's our 23 cents multiplied by 600. That's 138. 138. On a previous diagram, I came up with a slightly different number. On a previous diagram, I came up with a slightly different number, I think. I came up with 140. What's the difference here between this 140 and 138? The difference is, the reason I've got a different number is because we've actually rounded off 16.7 cents to 17 cents in our diagram. So we get a slightly different number. Our number varies by 2, but it really comes down to our rounding. We've used the same method. So if once we've rounded our average cost to 22 cents rather than 21.67, that accounts for the slight difference in answer. All right, so that's really our situation for the natural monopoly. This is how we calculate our maximum profit point. So the next thing we have to look at then is monopoly and the invisible hand. Why is there a conflict between what the consumer wants and what the monopolist wants and what the consumers desire? So I'm going to come back and talk to you about this a bit. Think about what the monopoly wants. The monopoly wants the product to maximize its own profit. And the monopoly has an advantage because it's a natural monopoly, and what the natural monopoly gets is a low average cost as a result of being a big firm. So the monopoly's cost is small. The big question for governments is this: if we have a natural monopoly and its costs are small, does that necessarily mean that the prices are small? Well, it may not mean that the prices are small. And the reason it may not mean that the prices are small is because the monopoly still has monopoly power. Consumers don't actually have a choice of who to buy from because the monopoly is the only firm. So an unscrupulous monopoly could say, well, we can produce the good very cheaply, but that doesn't mean we need to charge cheaply. We can charge whatever price we want. And that's what's going on in the diagrams that I have drawn for you before, that we saw where the maximum profit point was. We saw that the profit maximizing price was 45 cents, but the average cost wasn't 45 cents. The average cost was 22 cents. And so the monopoly was pretty much doubling its cost every time it charged a price. Its cost was 22 cents and it's charging a bit more than double to the consumer. So that might be good for the monopoly, but it's not good for the society. So sometimes governments choose to get involved and supervise the monopoly. Sometimes they take charge and they say to the monopoly, you can't charge any price that you want. You've got to charge a price that we tell you to charge, which is going to be good for the consumer. So I'm going to get into this now. I'm going to go back to my slides. And I'm going to... All right, here is our monopolist. And I'm going to now point out... Let me just see what other slides I've got down here. I've done a number of duplicate slides to point out what we need to know about government supervision. So, because monopolies don't always act in the best interest of society, governments have competition law. We know in monopoly there is no competition, so governments have to make firms behave as if there was competition. So competition law is intended to foster market competition by regulating the anti-competitive behaviour of the firm. And this ensures, well, the aim of this is to ensure that consumers are charged the lowest possible prices. So competition law means that the government will enter the market and they will have price regulation. They're going to be regulating the price. And there's a couple of ways that governments may choose to do this. One is to say, let's implement marginal cost pricing. Let's introduce marginal cost pricing. And what marginal cost pricing means is this, that the government sets the price. Where do they set the price? They set the price equal to the marginal cost. And we say this is the point of allocative efficiency because the consumer is being able to the consumer is being asked to pay enough to cover producing an extra unit of a good. So if a person wants to buy an extra unit of good, they need to be able to cover the marginal cost. So I'm going to show you what this looks like on the diagram now. You'll remember that the firm wants to charge, and I'm circling it here, 600, and the reason the firm likes 600 is because the firm's profit is 138 or 140 if we're rounding the figure off. But we saw that the firm is making the green rectangle in profit. But the problem with 600 is this. Imagine that this is a train service and consumers all want to catch the train to work. And the government has set the price the firm has set the price at 45 cents. What that means is 600 people are catching the train and 400 potential consumers are not catching the train. Why are they not catching the train? Because the fare is too high. So if we were to use marginal cost pricing, the government would actually tell the firm, you cannot charge 45 cents, you must charge 5 cents. And what that means is that the firm would be pushed, the firm would be forced to charge out here. The firm would be forced to charge 5 cents. 1,000 people would catch the train instead of 600 people. Unfortunately, when at the price of 1,000, at the price of 5 cents, that average marginal cost is actually below the average cost, and the firm would make a loss. So that is not a very practical solution, because if the firm was forced to charge 5 cents, it would make a loss, the firm would shut down, and under those circumstances, no one would be catching the train, because the train company would simply have to close down. So marginal cost pricing often, although it sounds like an attractive option, may not be practical. So what firms often opt for instead is average cost pricing. So let me go back and clean up that previous diagram a little bit. This is probably a better diagram to illustrate why allocative efficiency doesn't work. All right, allocative efficiency would not work. What's the problem? Right, the problem is that there's a loss. So I should have used that diagram instead. Sorry about that. This points out why allocative efficiency or marginal cost pricing is not practical. Let's go back to the other diagram, and this diagram refers to average cost pricing. Average cost pricing. Average cost pricing is where the firm is not told to charge the marginal cost. They're told to charge a price and quantity where the average total cost curve meets the demand curve. So the diagram that I used before was probably the more appropriate one to use here. And what the government tells the firm to do is this. They tell the firm to charge at a point where the average cost, I'm circling the average cost, and the demand curve cross each other. So at this point, at that point, this is called the point of normal profit, and at this point, right, at this point, at the point of 1,000, this is the point of zero economic profit. The firm covers its cost, including its opportunity cost, and that should be equal to if the firm had invested the money somewhere else. So what would average cost pricing look like? Average cost pricing would be where the government instructs the firm to set the price, where the government sets the price somewhere in here. We haven't actually allocated a price, but where the government tells the firm to set the price equal to the average cost. So that is called average cost pricing. And so what's the advantage of average cost pricing over marginal cost pricing? Right, the firm survives. Right, the firm survives. Now, will the firm like average cost pricing? The firm will not like average cost pricing. Let's go back to a previous diagram and I'll show you more clearly what I was having trouble with the diagram we had in front of us. Average cost pricing exists where those two lines cross. The average cost pricing would be set somewhere here, roughly 10, 12 cents, something like that. So the firm does not have to lower its price to 5 cents. It lowers its price to where it covers its average costs. So those are two forms of intervention by government: average cost pricing and marginal cost pricing. There is one other intervention that the government can allow, and this is called price discrimination. This is called price discrimination. So I want to go back to our diagram a bit, and I'll try and clean it up, and I'll try and explain what the issues are again with supervision. What the issues are with supervision. What does the firm want to do? The firm wants to set the price at 600. Why does the firm want to set the price at 600? Because the firm wants to maximize its profit. There's its profit. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? The problem with that is that the output is limited to 600 and many people cannot afford the product. I've marked those people over there in black. That's the problem with the firm maximising its profit. What's the problem with setting the price equal to the marginal cost? I'm circling that down the bottom. The problem with that is that if the government gets the firm to lower the price too much, the firm may not survive and the consumers won't get the service at all. So is there another compromise? And there is one compromise, and this is called price discrimination. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about what price discrimination is, and then I'm going to try and show you on the diagram very briefly. So, price discrimination. Imagine that the train company wants to set the price at 45 cents. Only 600 people are catching the train. The other 400 consumers are not catching the train because they can't afford the train fare. The firm wants to maximise its profit and charge 45 cents. So what is one other option that the government or the firm might entertain? Imagine this. Imagine the price is 45 cents and the firm sells 600 seats. And then what you have is 400 consumers who can't afford the fare. And what the government does for them is charge them a lower fare. So that's what we mean by price discrimination. It means different fares for different classes of consumer. And if the government did this, we would call this third degree price discrimination, right? It's called third degree price discrimination. And so what third degree price discrimination involves is separating your consumers into a number of different classes and then charging them a different price. On a train network, what might be the different prices that you might set? Well, you might have a price for pensioners, you might have a price for concession card holders, you might have a price for students. And we, in fact, do have price discrimination on our public transport in Sydney. And you can see the price discrimination very clearly because if you look at people tapping onto the bus or the train, they will have different colour Opal cards. And that's what price discrimination means, that for some people catching public transport, they'll be paying the full fare, but other people will not be paying the full fare. So that's price discrimination at work. That's called third degree price discrimination. There are other forms of price discrimination, and it is on your slide and you can read it through, but I'm going to talk you through it. there are two other forms of price discrimination. One is called first-degree price discrimination, and this is where every single person is charged a fare or a price equal to their reservation price. So high-income people with lots of money and high reservation prices, they'll be charged a high price, and then people on lower incomes, or people who don't value the product as much, perhaps, who have lower reservation prices, they would be charged their reservation price. If you think about what that means, it means that no consumer gets any consumer surplus at all, because every consumer is paying exactly their reservation price. So any surplus in the market belongs to the monopoly under that situation, and that is a concept that is likely to come up in multiple choice, perhaps in the exam. So perfect price discrimination or first-degree price discrimination occurs where every single consumer pays their reservation price. In reality, there's two reasons why we can't do that. One is it's illegal. The government will prohibit exploitation of consumers on that basis. And the second reason is, even if the government did permit it, it would be very hard in a practical sense to do it, because the firm would have to negotiate with every consumer, and by the time you did that, of course, you're going to waste too much time trying to identify people's reservation price. So it's a theoretical concept, but it's very rarely actually done. There is another form of price discrimination called second-degree price discrimination, where if you are a frequent customer, you may have a loyalty card from the firm, and as you buy more products, perhaps if you're a tradesperson and you're shopping at Bunnings or something, you're in a different class of consumer to the rest of the consumers, because you're buying so many products. So you might get a discount on that basis. That's called second-degree price discrimination. But we're concerned with third-degree price discrimination, where the consumers are divided into classes. Usually, this is done or often it's done, particularly if the government owns the natural monopoly. It's done on an ability to pay, and where people get a concession and pay a lower price. That's usually how this is done. So we'll just finish the concept off. I've got a little model in front of us, but that's what third-degree price discrimination means. So first-degree price discrimination, as I said, we're not really doing it, but it assumes that the monopolist knows the maximum price or the reservation price that every consumer is willing to pay, and then is able to extract it from them. That's first-degree price discrimination. So I've got a slide out of order there, excuse me. So that's first-degree price discrimination. Describes a situation where you know the reservation price and then you're able to charge it. Very hard to do in a practical sense. That's first-degree price discrimination. And as I said to you, a monopolist engaging in first-degree price discrimination is actually selling at the social optimum, because they can sell all the way down through the market all the way down to where the lowest paying consumer will actually buy the product, and they'll be buying it at the lowest possible price. But it also means that the monopolist is extracting all the surplus, as I've said to you before, because there is no consumer surplus, because the price is going to be equal to the consumer's reservation price, and so there is no consumer surplus. So the monopolist extracts all the surplus, there is no consumer surplus. And as I said, we have anti-competition laws that usually restrict this type of practice. Second-degree price discrimination. The monopolist charges different prices depending on the quality demanded. So I would say, e.g., a loyalty card. Right, loyalty card. But the third degree price discrimination is the one we're looking at. This is where different prices are charged based on consumers' observable attributes. For example, they live in a poorer area. They live in an area of poorer consumers, or perhaps they fall into a pensioner class or a student class or something like that. So let's imagine, first of all, we go back and we look at first degree price discrimination. What does that look like on our diagram? What it looks like on our diagram is this, that if I can make our diagram a little bit smaller. May not allow me to do it. It means that each consumer along our demand curve pays a different price. Each consumer along our demand curve pays a different price. So here's our demand curve. Here's a demand curve out here. So consumer number 100 pays this price. Consumer number 600 pays this price. Consumer 800 pays this price. Consumer 1000 pays this price. That's first degree price discrimination. And as we've said, we're not really assuming that it's going to happen, but we've already made our notes about this. We've already made our notes about first degree price discrimination, and we've seen that there is no consumer surplus. What we're really looking at here is third degree price discrimination. So let's just flick down through our notes here. Third degree price discrimination, and I'll describe to you how this works. There's different prices for different people. So imagine where we've got a diagram that looks like so, and the firm sets the price at the profit maximizing point. The firm sets the price at the profit maximizing point. And so the firm makes this profit. The firm makes this profit. That's the firm's profit. And then what the firm does, it says, okay, if we take consumer 700, what can we see about consumer 700? What I can see about consumer 700 is this, that at consumer 700, the reservation price of consumer 700, right, consumer 700, I've made a dot there on the vertical axis, on our price axis, is above our average cost and is above the marginal cost. So the firm could actually set the price at 700. So I'm going to call this PS for students. And what this means is that the first 600 people pay 45 cents or the maximum profit price, but the next 100 people, they pay a price below that point. And then we might go to consumer 800. These might be concession card holders. So we say, well, what's their reservation price? Their reservation price is here, right? I'll call them pensioners, PP. So their price, their reservation price, is still above the average cost and still above the marginal cost. So the pensioners are paying PP and the firm is actually adding to its profit each time. Let me show you how it adds to its profit. It's got its black rectangle, and now for the students, it's got this rectangle, the red rectangle. For the pensioners, it's got another rectangle. And so you can see now its total profit is actually increasing because it's got the black rectangle plus the red rectangle plus the green rectangle. And all of these are adding to the profit of the firm. And on one level, you could say, well, the firm's even more profitable now. And is that a good thing? So there's a debate about this, but we could also say it is better than just setting one price and having all the other consumers excluded from the product. So the price discrimination based on the third degree system, where some consumers are getting a concession price, it may actually be better for everyone, right? So under third degree, two things might happen. Profits may go up, and also more consumers can buy the product. More consumers can buy the product. So I'm going to finish off our examples today by just looking at a numerical example that you have at the end of your notes. This table before us had up to 1,000 units for sale. And when we were looking at this table originally, we assumed that all these consumers are all in one market. But imagine they're not all in one market. Imagine that they're in a number of different markets, and not only are they in different markets, but these markets are in different places. Like the consumers with the highest reservation prices are in Europe. The consumers with the middle level of reservation prices are in North America, in Canada, and the USA, assuming Donald Trump hasn't got some tariff between them. And then the third one is in Africa. So if we can then divide these markets up, we originally figured out that the profit maximizing price was at 45 cents. We originally figured that the profit maximizing price was at 45 cents. And at that point, the consumers in Canada and South Africa were locked out of the market. But what if we did this? And I'll allow you to just work through this slowly at your own speed, right? If we treat the world as one price, there's no price, one place, there's no price discrimination. There's no price discrimination, but the consumers are going to, they're all going to pay the same price, but as I said, the poorer consumers are going to be locked out. But this is not efficient. And the reason it's not efficient is because if we see the reservation prices that these people would pay, it will be above the marginal cost. So what if we broke this market up into three, and then what we would tend to do is perhaps have a North American market where we just work out the marginal revenue in just this area, just the area of North America. We work out that the marginal revenue is 45 cents, and that's the price we charge in this market. And both, not North America, Europe, both the French and Italians, they buy these products. And then we have another market for the North Americans, and we charge a price of 25 cents. And then we have another market in Brazil. I think I said Africa before. Anyway, we have another market in Brazil where the market price is 5 cents, but you can still provide the good at 5 cents because it still covers the marginal cost. And in this case, if you did this, the firm could sell in all markets. They could make a economic profit in Europe. They'd make an economic profit in North America, and they would cover their costs in South America, in Brazil. So that's an example of price, third degree price discrimination. So the last slides there, really just a repeat of what I was talking to you before about how we do it on the bus system. That's another example coming from the text slide notes. One other place you can do if you're doing some revision on this topic is to look at my other short Lightboard videos. They're much shorter. They go to the core of the topic much quicker. So they're not a bad form of review. So go and have a look at those as well. In some ways they'll be a bit clearer because they're much more concise and they're broken into bite-sized bits rather than having to concentrate all the way through a 2-hour lecture. In any case, I'll see you all tomorrow. We'll do lecture 8 tomorrow. I may, if I get time, even start on lecture 10. I know that I'm skipping a topic there, but these are short topics, 8 and 10. And if I get the chance to finish 8 quickly, I might then move to lecture 10, try and get that done quickly, and then I will do lecture 9 on Friday, and we'll have a revision lecture next week. I'm trying to create a little bit of space for a revision lecture. If I do move the times of the lectures next week, I'll make an announcement for you. And if you want to watch live, well, you can do it. So thanks for your attention today, and I will see you in the next lecture. Thanks very much.